Good morning, everyone. My name is Alicia Fletcher, and I am the director of the Delaware Network for Excellence in Autism, or DNEA, and I serve as the co-chair of Trauma Matters Delaware's primary, secondary, vicarious trauma and resilience work group. The DNEA is doing this presentation today for Trauma Matters Delaware, as May is Trauma Awareness Month. We're very excited to welcome you here today. We're going to start our presentation by telling you a little bit about the DNEA, go over a little bit of housekeeping information, and then we'll get started. So the Delaware Network for Excellence in Autism is governed by Senate Bill 93 in Delaware. We are led by the University of Delaware Center for Disability Studies. The DNEA is tasked with providing training and technical assistance and information dissemination that benefits individuals with autism, their families, and the professionals who serve them. We really try to leverage interdisciplinary expertise and collaboration across multiple organizations, state agencies, and specialists, including what's called the Interagency Committee on Autism, who kind of oversees our work. And we also have a network partner, which is probably familiar to some of you, Autism Delaware. So we're really excited to be here today and supporting Trauma Matters Delaware's mission to provide the support and training to the state of Delaware related to trauma. So a little bit of housekeeping. All participants are muted today and your screens are off. Please feel free to use the Q&A for any questions that you might have. If we have time at the end, we will do our best to answer questions. We can also answer them in the Q&A and send those answers back to you. We've created a Padlet for this training today. And a Padlet's pretty cool. It's like a virtual bulletin board. We've added various resources and materials related to DNEA and Trauma Matters Delaware. We also have some links in there for some resource guides, information that we might kind of call out to during today's training. You'll also see there's information about another training coming up, but that an agency is doing for Trauma Matters Delaware. So lots of different links that you can find all nice and neatly packed up in that Padlet. Certificates of attendance will be emailed out sometime in the next week or so. We'll use the Zoom attendance to verify who is here today. NASW Delaware has approved this training for continuing education credits. So please note that you have to attend the majority of the training to receive the certificate. Go ahead and spot check your Zoom name and make sure that whatever you are calling yourself on Zoom today is some way for us to be able to identify you and match that back up to your email address so that we can get that certificate out to you. So there's another trainer that's on with me today from the DNEA, and her name is Nicole Garrity. And Nicole started working at the Center for Disability Studies in June of 2022. She's proud to be a nationally certified school psychologist. Previously, Nicole has worked in the public school setting in various states, and in her school-based psychology practice, she had the privilege of working with children and youth of all ages and families, as well as staff. And she fully has fulfilled many capacities such as assessment, intervention, and consultation. So we're really excited to have Nicole with us. So today's training of autism and mental health, Nicole and I will kind of be popcorning back just a few times and providing you with this information. So we're really excited to have you here with us today. And also being able to support Trauma Matters Delaware. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, who is going to get our discussion started with talking about the way that we discuss disability.
Good morning, everyone. So glad to be here today. So we really want to take a moment and talk about changing perceptions and language surrounding disability. We've really seen a shift over the past 50 years or so in the way that our culture thinks about disability and autism. Instead of seeing an individual as having, or an individual with a disability as having a deformity, there's an acceptance of diversity within our population. People all have different abilities and they change from time to time. There's a growing realization that people with disabilities have a lot to contribute to society. They are a resource and productive members of society. Instead of living on the fringes of society, being locked away or in poverty because they haven't been able to find work, we're seeing supports in place that allow people with disabilities to participate fully in life, to have families, to work, to study, to play, and to choose the life that's right for them. Here on this slide, we've listed some ableist terms and suggested preferred language. Autistic preferred terms are more detailed and precise, referring to specific autistic experiences and individuals. They really provide a more accurate description of the strengths and specific areas in which autistic people may benefit from support. So let's go over these for a moment. First, rather than saying special interest, it's preferred to say areas of interest or expertise, or use terms like specialized, focused, or intense interest. Rather than using the term comorbid, and this is particularly relevant to our discussion today, it's preferred to name or say what specific need a person has. So a person with autism has anxiety. Next, we are generally against the use of functional labels, which really lead to the false idea that people function the same across all levels. In reality, each person on and off the autism spectrum has a unique set of skills and challenges. Functional labels really significantly downplay the uniqueness of each individual and lead to inaccurate and artificial categorization. Therefore, rather than using the terms high or low functioning, we want to describe specific strengths and needs and acknowledge the level of support needed across areas. Rather than explaining autism as a puzzle or using a puzzle piece as a symbolic representation, it's preferred to view and explain autism as a part of neurodiversity. Rather than viewing autism as an epidemic, autism is increasingly recognized and diagnosed. Instead of saying someone is at risk of autism, it's preferred to say that they may be autistic or have an increased likelihood of being autistic. And instead of trying to treat or cure autism, we focus on putting specific supports or services into place. I'd also like to review how Alicia and I will be discussing disability. It used to be that we defaulted to person-first language, which puts a person before a diagnosis describing what condition a person has, rather than asserting what a person is. For example, saying a person with a disability or a person without a disability. However, many in the disability community have shifted to using identity-first language. For example, saying autistic student, autistic person, or disabled person. This language emphasizes that the disability is part of who the person is and is also seen as an important and positive aspect of their identity. So throughout this talk, you're going to notice that we use both person and identity-first language. Ableism is the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. At its heart, ableism is rooted in the assumption that disabled people require fixing, and it really defines people by their disability. So it's really important to communicate respect for people when using either person or identity-first language. We have a list of some phrases to avoid when talking about a person with a disability. Instead of saying my people, my kids, my caseload, refer to individuals by name or the group with which you're working with, such as students in my classroom or George, who's in Mrs. Hall's classroom. Instead of referencing individual's parent by mom, for example, you should call them by their name or reference them in relation to the individual. For example, Billy's parents. Finally, acceptable alternatives to the disabled or stricken with includes the use of neutral language like they have a disability. If you're interested in learning more about ableism, Dr. Priya Lavani discusses ableism and what it means to disrupt it in a webinar that's available for free on the DNEA website. The webinar goes deep into discussing ableism and how discrimination against people with disabilities is really embedded in our language and our culture, and how we as professionals and families can become allies for disability justice. The DNEA also has created a resource guide that is available on our website and is also included in the Padlet that we referenced earlier, and we supplied the Padlet link into the chat. So I encourage you to take a look at these additional resources. All right, at this time, I'm going to pass it back to Alicia.
Hi there. So our training today is going to really focus on autism and mental health. Specifically, we are going to be looking at anxiety, depression, disorders of conduct, ADHD, and then we're going to talk about some evidence-based mental health treatments. So hopefully there are some mental health providers on here who are interested and wanting to learn more information specifically about modifications for CBT and TF-CBT. And then we're going to spend a little time listening to an audio clip that is recorded, and we will hear from somebody named Jessica, who will talk about her experiences in obtaining a autism diagnosis and also her challenges with mental health. So we feel like we have a pretty full agenda that we're excited to share with you today. So our training objectives are that we will cover the prevalence of commonly occurring mental health diagnoses, specifically as they relate to autism. We'll talk about how the core characteristics of autism increases one's susceptibility to mental health, and also some factors that influence mental health. So according to the CDC, the current autism prevalence rate is 1 in every 36 children. So this is a change, and this is very recent. I believe it was only, oh gosh, it's May now. So I think it was just last month that this prevalence rate has increased. So we continue to see an increase over the previous year's estimates. So really important to think about 1 in 36 being where we stand with the current prevalence rate. So on this slide shows and kind of highlights that among 8-year-old children, boys were nearly 4 times as likely as girls to be identified with autism. So, however, in 2020 marked the first time that the percentage of girls identified with autism to be over the 1% of the population in the community studies. So it's also important to notice that autism occurs in all racial and ethnic groups. And this is the first time that the percentage of 8-year-olds, Black, Hispanic, and Asian or Pacific Islander children were identified with autism was higher than 8-year-old white children. So that's kind of the opposite of previously observed racial and ethnic differences. So some pretty important information that has just been coming out. So there's two main core areas that differ in individuals with autism. Autism is really characterized by differences with social communication, which is kind of that box on the left, right under the word autism, and a demonstration of restricted repetitive patterns of behaviors or interests. And these kind of impact how somebody functions in all environments that they are. So in home, in the community, and at school. So differences in social communication and social interactions can really manifest and look different in a variety of ways and to varying degrees. So you might be looking at limited or absent speech, trouble comprehending others' emotions or nonverbal communication, or difficulty maintaining back and forth dialogue. The restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities also kind of holds a lot of information. So you might see a child with autism who might play with toys in a different manner than they're intended to. You might see some sorting by color or size, lining things up, maybe focusing on some different or unique characteristics of the item as opposed to maybe engaging in some pretend play or playing with the item more for its intended use. You might also see, as Nicole had mentioned in talking about, like trying to think of a way to not sort of use that term special interest, but that children with autism and individuals might have uncommon interests, or sometimes I like to say an affinity for, or sometimes kids that I see say that they're like really obsessed with, they like really like something a lot. And this could be all sorts of different topics, but it might be something that you find that like that child or that person really knows like a whole lot about dishwashers or pencils or state flags or bands or Michael Jackson or kind of, different, areas that somebody just has like a lot of facts and information about. Autistic people also might adhere to rigid behavioral routines, such as things needing to occur in the same way at the same time with the same things, with the same peoples, and have a difficult time when the schedule or something changes. That can be really stressful. And we'll talk about how that also can influence and move into that mental health piece. And all of these things that I'm talking about can be exhibited to varying ways and to varying degrees. So throughout the training, we'll really try to tie back and to thinking about how autism puts somebody to be maybe a little bit more susceptible to having some of these mental health difficulties or challenges. This slide really mentions the sensory differences, and sensory differences are really a very true thing, and they really can vary from day to day, from hour to hour. And the way that somebody responds to a sensory experience can really change as well. So we could be talking about sounds, smells, tags on clothing, the way clothing feels, the way somebody feels when they're sitting next to you. And this can also be thought of as something that you're kind of moving towards, like you want to feel that experience more deeply, or something that you're trying to get away from or escape because it feels too hot, too crowded, too loud, too much going on. So sensory differences can really affect how a person feels and can have a really significant impact on a person's life. So in thinking about mental health challenges and difficulties, you can sort of thread that needle through and think about the ways that, having to experience sensory differences can really affect and influence your mental health. So let's segue into that and talk a little bit about autism and mental health. So it can be really hard to challenging to identify mental health diagnoses for a few reasons. We know that one thing that happened is something that's called diagnostic overshadowing. And what that means, it's really our tendency as, teachers, parents, clinicians, everybody, to really kind of like focus in and have a more of a narrow view and look at the core characteristics of autism and kind of they're overshadowing our ability to identify mental health challenges. And so we attribute the symptoms of autism and we kind of miss that mental health challenge. So a lot of individuals with autism, are maybe being identified because we look at them and we think that that's their autism, it's the autism. But what we're really here today is to kind of widen your view on that and have you kind of get out of that box or container, if you will, to try to think more broadly that just because somebody has autism, that's not possibly, autistic people think of autism as part of what makes them who they are. And so you'll learn that, individuals with autism really are more susceptible to having more mental health diagnoses. So diagnosis can be a clinical challenge. Individuals with autism who experience some difficulties can present in different ways than their peers without autism. So we can kind of overlook the presence of different mental health challenges because, again, we might attribute them to being an artifact of autism. So diagnosing can be challenging because sometimes people with autism have difficulty recognizing or communicating their symptoms. Again, we only briefly touched on the core characteristics of autism, but if communication is a challenge, that can be hard to be able to talk about the way that you're feeling. Changes in physical discomfort can prompt spikes in self-soothing repetitive behaviors, as well as make somebody appear more irritable, aggression, self-injury, and other challenging behaviors. So it can make it hard to tease out whether the behaviors are related to autism or if there's something else going on. So a little example might be if someone's withdrawing in a social situation, we could attribute that they have autism. Maybe, that's the way that they feel like socializing. But we could also be missing out that maybe they're having social anxiety over and above their autism. So talking to that individual, asking them what they want in social or friend situations. So thinking about the treatment that you might target might be something like thinking about, let's just kind of dive in and start talking about social skills with this person. However, if there's a recognition that they have anxiety, then that's a condition of social skills development. So you might be wanting to think about some CBT, some different strategies, thinking about how you might work on that person's anxiety, even though they have autism. So you want to keep those strategies focused into the anxiety and not just think, oh, well, they're not interested or that's just part of their autism. So we want to consider in thinking about diagnosing with autism, communication challenges and language abilities. So it's important to pay attention to the assessment and measures that you're using. If you're using more abstract language, if you require somebody to identify emotions, it can pose a challenge. So it's important to note that many measures and assessments aren't normed for children with autism. And so kids with autism or any individual might respond differently than another person. So if you're identifying a standard score and you want to look at something being as clinically significant, for who's sitting in front of you, often I feel to be even more significant than what that score might be. So when you interpret those scores, think about the challenging ways of maybe not being able to answer those questions. And we want to really look at what's going on and sitting in front of us, thinking about how they're presenting and what we know about anxiety, depression, ADHD, disorders of conduct, different kind of things that you might be thinking of for a differential diagnosis. Because it's really important. Accurate diagnosis is the key for getting effective treatment. So taking those extra steps, allowing more time and making sure that you're getting a good assessment is really important. It's true in physical health as well as in mental health. So individuals with autism experience high rates of co-occurring mental health conditions, and there's a lot of information here. But basically approximately 70% of children have at least one mental health diagnosis. So that's a lot. So anyone who's working with children with autism, you should have some kind of like your radar has flipped up here, that, you know, taking a deeper dive, making sure that you're looking at the person and the environment and being as comprehensive as possible. And thinking about what else might be kind of going on with them and how you can unpack that. Autistic individuals really report, and I know this to be true in Delaware, that it's difficult and hard to find professionals who feel comfortable in providing them mental health like assessment and treatment. So that last bullet says mental health professionals express difficulty in identifying and using evidence-based practices due to limited professional training. And I'm here to say, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I have a small private practice. I work and see kids and families with autism. If you can take the basics of what you know about good practice in mental health and make some modifications, and I do have some slides at the end, you can absolutely provide support and work on treating anxiety. Like, I'm not treating somebody's autism. I'm not trying to make them less autistic. That's who the person is. But somebody who wants to socialize and feels really anxious, somebody who looks depressed, is feeling depressed, is having changes, is having different fall, the school, things are changing for them. Those are all really important things to look at and to treat, and not to kind of pass by. The next slide just shows some differential diagnoses that I'm not going to go through all these, that you might want to kind of think about whenever you're seeing someone with autism. A differential diagnosis is a process where you kind of have to think but the difference between two or more conditions and what could be behind somebody's symptoms. So, differential diagnoses of these different kind of diagnoses that are on this slide are important, because when you think about speech and language, one of the core characteristics of autism is social communication. Selective mutism is commonly co-occurs with autism. And so thinking about somebody who does have autism and is unable to, or feels anxious and is just very quiet, and like the school or in some environment just doesn't really talk. They can have they can have autism and selective mutism. And selective mutism absolutely 100% can be treated, should be treated, and can be worked on as it's co-occurring with their autism. So you can see on this slide lots of different kind of disorders and thought processes to kind of work through. The next slide just is showing you two different kind of references. So the one on the right, most people are familiar with, that's the DSM-5. That's the text revision that has, I think that was last year that came out. The one on the left is a pretty handy little guide. It is the DMID-2, the Diagnostic Manual of Intellectual Disabilities 2. And basically what that is it's a great reference, and it provides you with a way to kind of interpret how the DSM might apply to somebody with an intellectual disability. And you can also use that for thinking about autism. So somebody who's anxious, in DSM presents like this, and this, and then the DMID-2 is like, here's a nice little interpretation. Somebody with an intellectual disability might look like this in a little bit of a different way. So really important, handy little guide for somebody to have. So neurodevelopmental disorders are a group of conditions with the onset and the developmental period. So when we're thinking about autism, it is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So they frequently co-occur. So individuals with autism could have an intellectual disability, and they might also have ADHD. So important to consider and think about that, that it's the first chapter in the DSM. That's where autism lives. And a lot of what we think about with co-occurrence with ADHD is also right there in that chapter. So this slide is just listing off some of the neurodevelopmental disorders that are found in that chapter, or section, I guess you might want to say. And there's autism right on there, ADHD. So lots of different, again, with that differential diagnosis and thinking about might be co-occurring, you can also just have a good look-see right there and there in the beginning. So approximately 70% of children with autism have at least one mental health disorder. I shared that with you. So really so important right there. If you could put that in your back pocket and take it with you today, I'd be pretty thrilled for you to be thinking that this is happening. This is something that we all really should be very aware of. Research shows that children with autism meet criteria for more than one diagnosis. Anxiety affects about half of those with autism who have mental health. The rate of mental health disorders in children with autism is 4 to 6 times higher than the general population. And emotional and behavioral problems are a majority issue of people with autism, occurring more frequently than their peers across the life course. So super important information. Again, I just want everyone who works with individuals with autism to kind of leave here today, not with like having all these statistics memorized, but just with the general idea that when you're seeing somebody, working with somebody, whether it's in mental health, a camp, and any sort of social service, medical, any sort of environment, it's so important to look at them like as a whole person and to think about what you're seeing and what you're treating. So the most commonly co-occurring mental health concerns are listed here. Anxiety, depression, anger, contact and attentional difficulties. And there's often a lot of overlap between these. So symptoms of these challenges can look like a lot of things. Sometimes they can look more straightforward, and sometimes they're harder to see because they overlap with the diagnosis of autism. So you might see some more medical complaints, worries, fearfulness, sadness, or irritability. And then you can also see some more of like externalizing symptoms like verbal or physical outbursts. So there's more common disorders or challenges that we see, like general anxiety disorder, specific phobias. And then sometimes those phobias can be like things that maybe aren't just your typical like spiders or heights. It could be like fear of the color yellow, or some kind of food, or something that feels like a little bit maybe outside of the realm or a bit of an outlier, or something that you've never maybe sort of like considered or thought of before as something that could worry somebody. And then we also see social anxiety, depression, and then behavioral things like ADHD, oppositional defiant, and conduct disorder. So we know that the core characteristics of autism increase susceptibility to mental health disorders. Expressive communication can be really difficult for a person with autism, and this gets understandably frustrating. Somebody's trying to tell you something and other people aren't understanding. And also when there's confusion on their part, like understanding language or interpreting social situations, it can be really frustrating, and a person with autism might not have the ability to manage these associated feelings that come along with the experiences. Or they might not have the language to communicate these feelings in a traditional way that you might be expecting. So the restricted repetitive patterns of behavior. So in most cases, the restricted repetitive patterns of behavior serve a really important purpose for somebody with autism. So, we're definitely moving people away from thinking that they need to make these behaviors kind of go away. They can really be a very strong coping mechanism for somebody. And so without replacing the behaviors or understanding the purpose of it, you really could be taking something away from someone. That is a way that they sort of manage, being stressed out or feeling anxiety. Sometimes many people with autism can be rigid. They can struggle with transitions, sensory experiences. And because of it's very challenging, their ability to understand or kind of like have that book of rules of social situations can make them feel even more anxious. So you can see that there's so many reasons why someone with autism might be more susceptible to mental health disorders and challenges. So there's some risk factors to be aware of when working with youth with autism. You want to be really making sure that you take a thorough family history of mental health conditions. So looking at social difficulties, if somebody doesn't have close friendships, and they did, if they're having challenges with social interactions, feeling bullied, discriminated against, you want to look at cognitive deficits. So if someone's having difficulties with abstract thinking, memory, reasoning, executive functioning, identifying emotions, that's also kind of considered a risk factor. Environmental changes. So if someone has a change in their independence, privacy, choice, being in some sort of very unfulfilling job placement or program is also would put somebody at risk if it's like not like a stimulating environment, or somebody's just like filing or working in some kind of situation that really isn't filling their needs. I mean, that would also put you at risk. And then any sort of psychological need, history of trauma, adverse childhood experiences, kind of chronic stress. Just like anyone who doesn't have autism, those things would put somebody at risk for having increased susceptibility to having mental health challenges. It's the same for people with autism. Something that's a little different for people with autism is called masking or camouflaging. And that's when you're pretending to be someone you're not. And, kind of think of that as like, it can be for people like a little bit of a social survival strategy. It requires a lot of effort. And, masking is when you spend the whole day at work or school kind of trying to fit in and pretend to be somebody that maybe you're not. And so whenever you kind of get done with that experience, it can really make you feel very depleted and take some time for you to maybe like sort of reset and recover. So that sort of like cycle of needing to mask and camouflage and come home, you can see how that really can put you for increased susceptibility for anxiety, depression, and actually goes further down that continuum for increased suicidality. So there's a quote from the qualitative research there. Sometimes when I have to do a lot of camouflaging in a high stress environment, I feel as though I've lost track of who I really am, and my actual self is floating somewhere above me like a balloon. In a slide or two, we're going to watch a little video about autism and mental health. We really think it's important to have the autistic voice present in as much of our work and training and technical assistance that we provide in the state. That's not always possible to have like a panel that we can have with us at all of our trainings. So when I went over the beginning and talked about Jessica's story, like bringing her voice in a slide or two, we're going to watch a little clip from with some autistic self-advocates who are going to talk about mental health. And there's a lot of masking and camouflage that kind of comes up. But really, it can look super different from person to person. So if you think about like needing to force or fake eye contact, imitating smiles or other facial expressions, if you're really very interested in something, but it's not like socially fitting in, to try to have to hide or minimize your personal interests, having those like sort of scripted, rehearsed responses to questions and scripted conversations, pushing through intense sensory situations that are really hard to be in, needing to hide possible, self-stimulatory behaviors, like maybe jiggling your foot or hand flapping. So it's a really sort of challenging thing to think about. This slide that's up here can kind of list off the effects of masking. So stress and anxiety can be really higher in people who routinely mask autistic traits compared to those who mask less often. And some of the research also shows that we know that males are identified with autism more than females, and that females might just be better at masking autism. And so there's a lot of females out there in the world who are going to school and work who have autism undiagnosed, but really do a good job of sort of masking that in those situations. It can lead to depression. Those who report masking their autistic traits have symptoms of depression and feel unaccepted by people. It's exhausting. It requires a lot of energy. I just kind of hit on that delayed identification. A loss of identity. So if you always need to be pretending that you're somebody that you're not, it sort of can start to feel mixed up and confused as to like, am I betraying myself? Who am I? Where am I? How do I need to act? And again, that increased risk for suicidal thought. So prolonged masking has been linked to lifetime suicidality. And, just really important to think about. And I do think that sometimes we don't kind of take the full scope of the picture in and thinking about autism and again, how that really does make someone susceptible to so many different kind of mental health challenges. So on this next slide, we're going to watch a video about autism and mental health. And again, what I really like about this video is that it features autistic self-advocates who share their thoughts with us about mental health. So once the video is over, I believe Nicole's going to pick it back up and she's going to go over the more specific mental health concerns and how they might look in somebody with autism.
This video series was produced from the Autism Mental Health Literacy Guide by the Autism Mental Health Literacy Project, AM Help Group. This video is one of 6 in the series about different aspects of autism mental health literacy. For this video, we will talk about understanding autistic mental health. Challenges with mental health are very common. In fact, 1 in 5 people experience a mental health problem at some point in their lives, and rates are estimated to be higher for autistic adults. Social, psychological, and biological factors play important roles in mental health. This video will talk about some of these factors and how they can contribute to autistic mental health. Growing up in a society that is not understanding, accepting, or supportive can impact autistic mental health, how autistic people see themselves, others, and their lives.
I feel like there's always some social game being played that I'm not aware of. People constantly say things that they don't mean, leaving me mistrusting of most people. I finally got to the point in my life that I looked at everyone with suspicion because I would make plans to meet someone for an activity and they'd show up half an hour late or worse.
Masking, also known as camouflaging, is when an autistic person finds ways to pass as non-autistic in everyday social interactions. The need to mask can make an autistic person exhausted because it takes so much effort. This can lead to many mental health problems like anxiety, depression, and poor self-image.
I feel really worn out and exhausted from masking and being social at work to the point where I get home and just pass out. I get frustrated because I don't really work that many hours, and yet I'm so tired afterwards. It often means the rest of my night is spent recuperating or sleeping off the workday, and I don't have the energy to do other things, or I stay up very late trying to make up for that recuperation.
There are many social factors that impact autistic mental health. Examples of important social factors are social networks, family, friends, stigma, negative life events, economic disadvantages, housing, education and workplace issues, and the kinds of services or supports people have. We will explore just a few of them here. Some autistic people can thrive when connected with healthy social groups, family, or friends, like to autistic peers who are supportive and help them feel that they matter and belong. However, autistic people may struggle with accessing these social connections. Some autistic people may be in abusive relationships or become involved with inappropriate peers or unsupportive family members.
One thing that gives me a lot of trouble interacting with non-autistics is all the social rules about subtext and hidden meaning that are used in interpreting communication. They use various social rules about hidden meanings to interpret things. As an autistic who tends to be very literal, it can lead to a lot of problems.
School and work are major sources of stress and can have a long-lasting impact on many autistic people. School and work can be full of isolation and social confusion. Bullying and discrimination are big issues. There are many demands placed on students when they go through school and when students need to transition from one school or situation to another. Schools and workplaces need to supply a supportive environment to address these challenges.
Within employment, there's always the extra push to mask and do even more than my best. Never ever complain. Only use positive language. Don't slouch. Smile. Never give your employer a reason to regret hiring you. The job you have is likely the only job you have. And with the unemployment rates so high, it's not like you can just walk out and get a new one tomorrow. You have to show them that hiring an autistic person wasn't a mistake.
Autistic people often report difficulties when accessing supports. Adequate autism-informed mental health supports are rare and hard to come by. There may be barriers in finding them, affording them, or having long wait lists. It can also be stressful to access supports. Many services may not have the right kind of experiences, training, and skills to work with autistic people, which can make autistic people feel misunderstood or not taken seriously.
When I've sought help for my mental health problem, virtually all of the programs that I have been referred to have been designed for non-autistic people and involve things like group therapy and meditation, both of which are distressing to me. Even if I give them a try and find them unsuitable, I'm often labeled as non-compliant, and there are no alternatives made available to me. Even though I recognize that I have a mental health problem and I'm asking for help, there simply isn't any help available for someone like me, and this has had devastating effects on my mental health.
There are psychological factors that impact autistic mental health. For example, one's self-worth or self-image, planning or organizing skills, areas of focus, interests, and passions. Here, we will explore a couple of those factors. When autistic people feel that they are appreciated for their strengths and uniqueness and are kind and accepting of themselves, they can have a positive view of who they are. When you negatively judge yourself because of how others judge and treat you, you can feel ashamed, distressed, and more likely to experience negative mental health.
As a result of the social isolation, my self-worth and image were at its lowest point in high school. However, it has increased steadily since then. It's still sometimes a learning curve for me to remember that not everything that went wrong in that interaction was my fault. However, as I said, my self-esteem and image has increased steadily within the past 9 years, much more than it did in the first 18 years of my life.
It is important for any person's mental health to be able to pursue their passions. When an autistic person's interests are seen as problems rather than as hobbies or expertise, this can make a person feel shame or feel that they are wrong to have that interest. Many autistic people can focus very intently on specific passions, and this can be a source of joy and positive mental health.
Our daughter danced for over 20 hours a week. It was her obsession, but also her greatest love, and her only source of physical activity. It was her safe place, and a world where the work that she put into it was equal to what she got out. Dance was a world that she understood. Unfortunately, it also caused her tremendous physical pain. At almost 18 years old, she was diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and was forced to cut down on the intensity and frequency of dance. Given that she is all or nothing, Her inability to give 100% of herself meant stopping entirely. Her grief was unbearable and continues to this day, years later.
There are biological factors linked to autistic mental health. For example, genetics, sensory differences, and physical health. We're going to explore a couple of them here. Autistic people tend to have sensory differences and may either seek sensations or avoid them. When an autistic person gets the right kind of sensory input, the information from seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, or feeling, sensing, they can feel good. It can be calming or enjoyable. Some autistic people stim, which can be a way to feel calm. It can also be a way of expressing themselves. When a person can exercise, have good nutrition, and generally has good physical health, they are more likely to have positive mental health.
I keep very fit, work out 4 times a week or more. It helps physical health, but also mental health as well as anxiety.
Physical health problems or poor physical health can affect mental health. These are conditions like chronic pain, digestion issues, irritable bowel syndrome, or sleep problems.
I have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which many autistic people have. I do not receive adequate care or treatment for this disorder, which causes me pain virtually all of the time. This has devastating effects on my mental health, as pain makes all of my sensory issues so much worse.
The social, psychological, and biological factors we discussed in this video play a role in how autistic people experience mental health. You can find more information about these factors that impact autistic mental health and more examples in the AM Help Guide. Knowing more helps more. This project is funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada.
So I think that video really highlights, what we were speaking to related to masking and camouflaging, as well as the kind of intersection of physical, mental, social, communication, different factors that really interplay for autistic individuals. So now we're going to really shift and go deeper into discussing the 4 most prevalent mental health diagnoses in autistic individuals. We'll talk about the prevalence of each of these respectively, as well as the presentation in autistic individuals. And then we'll give some brief examples to explain. Although anxiety is not considered a core feature of autism, approximately 40% of young people with autism have clinically elevated levels of anxiety or at least one anxiety disorder, which does include obsessive compulsive disorder. So when we think about the core characteristics of autism, we think about how they may contribute to anxiety. And Alicia, spoke to this a little bit already, but to look a little bit closer, when we think about social situations, they can be really difficult to interpret and understand. It can be very complex. And when somebody is feeling like they want to make friends, but they don't know how to go about it, that can really cause a lot of anxiety. Also, when we think about, difficulties with transitions or changes, and when there may be some rigidity that's associated with their thoughts and feelings, and how that might relate to anxiety as well. Certainly, as we've mentioned, communication difficulties can also cause or increase anxiety. There may be difficulty communicating needs, taking perspective of others, being able to communicate and make and maintain friendships. Some of the difficulties with sensory regulation may also contribute to anxiety, feeling overwhelmed, having sensory needs, being over or understimulated in certain situations can have an impact. And then in general, difficulties coping and with emotional regulation can lead to increased anxiety. So it can be difficult sometimes to tease apart the differences between autism and anxiety. On this slide, we've listed common diagnoses related to anxiety in general, but then we also explain how the presentation of anxiety could look in autism. So specifically, we could see anxiety related to routine or novelty, when things change, changes in schedules occur, when something's new, when they may not understand the expectations. As Alicia noted, we may see unusual and very specific fears. You may see an increased social fearfulness, again, over and above the autism. And we might also see an increase in compulsive and or ritualistic behavior, those repetitive behaviors we may see if someone is experiencing anxiety, an increase in those behaviors. So we have a case study here about a boy named Ryan, who's 7 years old. And during school, his teacher begins moving the desks to the side of the classroom because they're preparing for a guest speaker who's going to bring in some live animals. Ryan becomes a little upset and begins to walk around the room in a disruptive manner. He begins to loudly repeat Mickey Mouse speech. He also, when his teacher attempts to refocus him, he throws his water bottle through a glass window, and he's then assisted out of the classroom. So in thinking about what we just discussed related to anxiety, what are some factors that might be causing Ryan's anxiety? Could it be the sensitivity to the sound, the desks being moved around, his peers getting louder? Could there be anxiety related to the change in routine? He's not sure what to expect. He doesn't maybe understand what's going on. Or could it be related to just feeling overwhelmed in the classroom? So the answer really is that it's all of the above. All of these factors could be contributing to his anxiety. So again, just emphasizing the importance of rather than just attributing, what Ryan's thinking or feeling or how he's acting to the autism, thinking about and understanding that there's anxiety over and above the autism, and that it's really important for us to not only consider and understand that, but to address that. Now let's move on and talk about depression. So there can be high rates of depression and anxiety in autistic individuals. The lifetime estimated range of clinical depression is very large, anywhere from 1.4 to 70%. But it's really important to understand this range is because of some of the difficulties identifying, as we talked about earlier, but this rate is higher than the general population. Depression and anxiety also share several overlapping and intersecting presentations, which again really make it difficult to properly diagnose and treat. We may see irritability, social withdrawal, low motivation, fatigue, flat affect, problems with appetite, problems with sleeping. All of these types of things that we may see can be shared between autism and depression. So again, it's really important for us to have an understanding of how somebody may be impacted by depression. And this is so important because the consequences of not identifying and treating that depression can be really dire. Depression can impact somebody's independence, their coping, their daily living skills, their social skills, their communication. And these are things that autistic individuals may already find challenging. So it's really important for us to, again, be aware. We do have some risk factors listed in consideration of what may make someone more susceptible to depression. We may see specifically related to autism that increased social or self-awareness, again, wanting to make friends, but not knowing how to do that. Anxiety in and of itself also puts someone at more risk for depression. Related to the core characteristic of repetitive behaviors, those behaviors can easily turn into ruminating thought patterns. In addition, autistic individuals are more susceptible to bullying and having negative peer interactions, which in turn puts them at greater risk for depression. As we also talked about, experiencing a traumatic event, as well as communication challenges may put someone at greater risk. So when we think about how depression may present in autistic individuals, we may see an increase of repetitive behaviors. We may also see an increase of aggression or self-harm. So again, with those particular behaviors, it's really important to consider if there's depression present, because we may be quick to attribute those behaviors to something else. We may also see changes in restricted interests. They might have a greater intensity of those restricted interests. There may be a more morbid focus to those restricted interests. And then, similarly, we may want to be attentive to mood changes or changes in irritability. Research does show that autistic individuals think about death or ending their lives 3 to 9 times more than their peers. So additional, risk factors, again, those lack of coping strategies, the lack of social supports, and the bullying would put somebody at more risk. We'll talk more about different supports to put in place for all of these co-occurring mental health concerns, but want to take a moment right now at this juncture to talk about tips to address suicidal thoughts. So of course, paying attention, talking about it, working as a team to help the individual, and certainly, thinking about ways that we can try to prevent by preventing bullying, reducing social isolation, working with the individual and determining with them what their social goals are, and then helping them to meet those social goals. So we'll also share, crisis information and resources with you at the end of the training, but we just wanted to take a second here to, share some additional tips. So let's look at a case study. Now we're talking about Sally. She's a 12-year-old 6th grade female with autism, and she performs academically at grade level, but has difficulties socially, and she also has anxiety. She enjoys conversing with and learning about dolphins, and she frequently draws dolphins and has dolphin figurines that she likes to organize in her room at home. Recently, everyone has noticed that she's become irritable, and she's triggered by what seems to be kind of smaller things and things that she wasn't triggered by previously. She's become aggressive towards her parents, and that also has never happened before. She also does not want to watch her favorite dolphin show anymore and has been really looking into morbid information about dolphin deaths. So her teachers and parents, are seeing these things, and they agree that she's exhibiting, these symptoms that may be related to depression. So let's think about for a moment what risk factors related to autism could be contributing to her depressed mood. So there could be difficulties using coping strategies to manage stressful situations. There may be difficulties that Sally is experiencing in expressing her emotions, how she's feeling to others. And then also, she may be experiencing difficulties relating to interacting with others. So again, all of these are different risk factors that are really contributing to Sally. And again, being aware of these risk factors and going beneath the surface of just looking at the different behaviors that she's demonstrating and understanding if there is depression underneath. So now let's talk more about disorders of conduct. Oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD, may involve or entail when someone is quick to lose their temper. Maybe they argue frequently with adults or frequently refuse to follow rules. You may see deliberately annoying or bothering other people or blaming others for their mistakes. You may see also increased anger or vindictiveness. So a large percentage of children and individuals with autism may experience, may also be diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder. Then we have conduct disorder, which is really relating to lying, truancy, stealing, hitting, fighting, biting. And you can see where these behaviors may lead to school suspension or expulsion, or involvement with the criminal justice system. So it's really felt that the difference between oppositional defiance disorder and conduct disorder is really in the severity of symptoms. And it also lies on the continuum of developmental progression, as we see progression from ODD to CD with age. There are commonalities, of course, between them that we have listed here, defiance of authorities, anger outbursts, antisocial behaviors. And you can see where these really have a significant role and can cause different, difficulties in social, academic, occupational, areas, and can really impact an individual's life. Another disorder of conduct includes intermittent explosive disorder. This really entails when there are outbursts that are out of proportion with the trigger or the stressor. It may include destruction of property or aggression. But the key distinction here is that the outbursts are typically impulsive. They're not premeditated. As with the other conduct disorders of conduct, it may cause significant distress, impairment of functioning, and it has significant implications for an individual's life. So with these conduct disorders of conduct, we want to think about strategies including functional behavioral assessment, using reinforcement, functional communication training, helping someone express their needs. And we can see that these types of evidence-based practices and supports can really help individuals. But again, in thinking about these conducts of disorder, thinking back to our discussion related to anxiety and depression and what we're going to talk about in a moment, related to ADHD, if those disorders are also intersecting for the individual as well. So we're going to apply our knowledge. Jimmy is 13 years old and he got caught stealing a video game from Target. He was also suspended from school for aggressive behaviors. So, again, this is a limited amount of information, but just helping us to review the different disorders of conduct. Which may we be considering? Oppositional defiance, ADHD, conduct, or anxiety. So the answer here would be conduct disorder because it has those higher intensity behaviors. He's stealing. He's also older in his teenage years. So here's another example. At school, the teacher informed the class that the student who provided the correct answer would receive a Jolly Rancher. Teddy is an 11-year-old boy, and he raises his hand and responds incorrectly. So the teacher moves on to the next student, and Teddy shoots up to his feet and begins yelling at the teacher and throws his textbook at the wall. So he also has had an aggressive outburst last week. So what might we be thinking about to describe Teddy's behaviors? Thinking about oppositional defiance, intermittent explosive disorder, conduct disorder, or anxiety. We may want to think about intermittent explosive disorder, or B, because again, we have that distinction that it's not premeditated. It's like a quick reaction that's disproportionate to the situation. And we have one more example here. So Roger is a 5-year-old preschooler. When he does not get his way at home, he tells his mother no and runs away, and then hits his sister. At school, he frequently disobeys directions and does the exact opposite of what the teacher tells him to do. He also, in interacting with peers, sometimes knocks over their block towers or destroys their work. So thinking about Roger, which of these 4 may we think best describes the behaviors? We would lean towards oppositional defiant disorder because of his age, because of the pattern that we're seeing over time and the specific behaviors we're seeing over time. So now we're going to move our discussion to talk about ADHD. So ADHD is one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders of childhood, and it's diagnosed typically in the preschool years. According to the CDC, approximately 6% of children and adolescents in the United States meet the diagnostic criteria for ADHD. We also see an increase in prevalence in autistic individuals. So just to break down ADHD a little bit, we see that there are 2 different kind of subtypes. We have inattention. So that's really describing difficulty focusing on an activity or a task. We also see a hyperactive type in which children are really having trouble sitting still. They act like they're driven by a motor. They're always on the move. And then you sometimes have a combined presentation in which you see inattention and hyperactivity. And these behaviors that we're seeing are, interfering with functioning, and they're also present across multiple settings in the home, the school, in any environment. So it can be very difficult and challenging to distinguish autism between ADHD, even for experienced clinicians. And that's because the core characteristics of autism may look like attention problems or hyperactivity. But we have on this slide some ways to help understand the differences between ADHD and autism. When we think about autism, as we shared with the core characteristics, there's that core characteristic of difficulties with social communication and social interactions. So that's primarily a way that we can help understand the differences. Whereas with ADHD, there may be some social challenges, but they really stem from those impulsive behaviors or inattention to social cues. Related to autism, we can think about sensitivity to change and the dependence on routines, as well as that focus interest as other ways to kind of distinguish between ADHD and autism. So it can be really helpful if you're considering, understanding if there's ADHD in addition to autism, to partner with parents, partner with autism specialist providers to really work as a team to help determine and distinguish. So now I am going to put Alicia in. She's going to pass back to Alicia, and she's going to talk about evidence-based treatments for mental health.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. So there are some evidence-based mental health treatments for autism. So you can see 4 of them that we have listed here on this slide. So there are some atypical antipsychotic medications that can be helpful. And of course, any discussion about medications really needs to be approached very carefully with families. It's important to have this conversation as a team of supporters and always include a physician, hopefully someone who specializes in children, if that's who your focus is. Evidence suggests that individuals with autism and ADHD really do benefit from pharmacological interventions to kind of address the symptoms of ADHD. And I've definitely seen that in my practice. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm going to go over some modifications here starting in the next slide. Something that some of you who might work in mental health are aware of. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about that. Mindfulness has shown to be useful to help individuals with autism gain a better understanding of psychological experiences and develop more coping strategies, especially related to anxiety. And number 4 on there, at times hospitalization is needed. And this is really a tricky factor, as we know that there's not a lot of great options for hospitalization for kids with autism. And this may need to be considered at times for some individuals that might have some significant mental health distress. So that's something that might need to happen at times. And it's if the need is there, it can be really very stressful. And it's something that I know in Delaware is constantly being looked at, reviewed, and thought about how we could be more thoughtful about supporting children who are in crisis with more significant, higher levels of care. So as mentioned earlier, CBT is an evidence-based practice. Chances are many of you have had some training in CBT. It's one of the most evidence-based and kind of more well-known. Most people sort of like lean into this space for treating anxiety and depression. A lot of work has been done to show that it's really helpful for autistic people as well in relating to anxiety. It really gets at some of the challenges that kids with autism face to make them more susceptible to anxiety and depression, mainly around challenges identifying feelings and understanding the connections. If you think about that cognitive triangle of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And it's really applicable to working with autistic people. So as a clinician, you need to think about some modifications to standard CBT protocol, some general modifications I'm going to go over in these next couple of slides. On the next slide, you'll see we have an example, just these kind of, they're not like, they look a little blurry, but they're there. But on your Padlet, you can access, this is modifications to CBT for autism. So we've kind of laid that out, and I'm going to go through a little bit of them on these upcoming slides, but you can retrieve this through the DNEA webpage. You can actually order copies of this if you are in Delaware. As a professional, you can provide those directly to, sometimes if families want to provide them to like a mental health specialist, or if a mental health specialist themselves is familiar with CBT and would like to think about how to make these modifications, we've created this handy resource guide. So you can download it as a PDF, and you can also order paper copies, and we'll mail them right out to you free of charge. So we welcome that kind of order. So I'm just going to quickly go through some general modifications. So here's some general thoughts to keep in mind. So consider separate and simultaneous treatments for co-occurring disruptive behaviors. So someone like Nicole was talking about who might have some disorder of conduct, or you're kind of like ruling in or ruling out, even thinking about ADHD, maybe thinking about how you might want to address those first before going straight into CBT might be helpful. When you're working with someone with autism doing CBT, caregivers really have to be involved. You really want to include them much, much more than you might do typically. And their involvement should include the psychoed assessment, changes in symptoms over time, and supporting the completion of the homework and practice skills in between sessions. Because we all know if you're doing CBT, just talking about it in sessions or virtually or wherever you're working with that person is not enough. You need to put put things in place to make sure that there's practicing. If you're doing exposures, what you're working on, you want to make sure that that's occurring outside of session. And so having that caregiver support is really important. You also want to make sure that you're working as a team with providers, caregivers, educators, kind of anybody. Having a good understanding of how additional interventions might complement or contradict what you're doing. So if there's a lot of rescuing behavior going on, or this person that you're working with kind of avoids certain situations because of anxiety, and a lot of people are putting things in place to make sure that they don't need to have that experience, and you're starting to work on a hierarchy of exposures, it's really important to make sure that other people who are part of this person's life understand like the goals of treatment and understand the trajectory of anxiety and what you're working on. So making direct contact with other practitioners to support that person so that the burden doesn't fall on the family, and it's really maybe not like appropriate or like their jobs to be like really trying to teach or explain about CBT. Some in-session strategies, you can see on the right, I have myself as the therapist on here. We didn't talk a lot today about visuals, but using visual supports are really so extremely important for autistic individuals, being able to see when things will happen, as opposed to verbally needing to kind of digest and know what comes next. It's really helpful for them to have an understanding. So you can see that I've made like a therapy session with Sarah on here. And Sarah really is very interested in, can you guess it, cats. You see those cats up top. So I didn't decide on number 2 that Sarah's going to talk about cats for 5 minutes. So I have this on a dry erase, and like number 1 is filled in because that's like where we're going to start. But then I'm going to ask Sarah, like, what does she want to do whenever I'm done with like working on the feelings chart? And I would have the feelings chart right there and like show her, this is where we're going to start. This is what I want to do. What do you want to talk about? You have 5 minutes after we get through that. And so I'm showing you a completed one, but this is really putting her in the lead because she needs to be reinforced for putting in that hard work as you're starting to get to exposures that become more tricky and are harder for someone to really want to do. But using visuals throughout the session to accommodate visual and concrete learning styles, like super helpful. Also, I don't think there's one on here, but if you wanted to have movement breaks or some sort of sensory activity, if you're looking at someone who kind of needs to move around, like sometimes I have like a weighted ball if I'm seeing somebody in face-to-face. And so one of the breaks might be to have a catch where we maybe count to 20, or we let the person pick the number, like how many throws back and forth are we going to try to get? So, you just want to allow yourself to kind of come out of your box and be like comfortable in supporting the person where they are and with what they need. The other thing you want to do is allow more time for, expressive and receptive communication. Really, when you ask questions, you want to wait a full 5 seconds before you're plowing through to the next thing that you want to know. So allowing someone to like digest what you're asking, giving them time to like give you an answer. It's really important. There's a little picture on the right there. That's something called the time timer. If you're unfamiliar with it, it could be your new best friend. Most professionals and individuals who I introduced the timer to just absolutely love it. You can find it on Amazon. It shows the passage of time. A lot of people I see with autism are very fixated on time. How long are we going to talk? How long will I be here? How long will this take? It's not that they don't like me or that they want to go. They just want to know, how long are we going to be here? So using a time timer shows the passage of time, especially whenever you're working on talking about something that might be somebody's like a phobia or a fear or something that's bothering someone, like knowing how long do I have to do this? It's not personal for you. It's just to show time. So also for on Sarah's schedule for her 5 minutes to talk to me about cats. So I would absolutely show that and prompt her to say, wow, you're only having like a tiny bit of time left. I just see a little bit of red left on your timer. And then it's going to be back to me and it's my turn and I'm going to be doing whatever that next step is on her schedule. So to increase that participation, it's also fine for you to focus on whatever someone's interested in. So you saw on that schedule, I had cats on there for Sarah. If somebody loves Teslas or bottled water or Michael Jackson, go with it. So you want to be able to integrate their favorite character into an example and kind of use that to your advantage. So what are some modifications that can be made during the psycho-ed phase? Extra time. I know I said that in the previous slide for receptive and expressive communication, but allow that time to establish rapport, to learn about what they're interested in. I don't care, if you can have a session where you're just like giving them some time to tell you all about dragons or whatever it is, like just roll with it. It really, you might not know enough about it to actually integrate it in. So, I mean, I have a lot of knowledge now about a lot of different things that I never thought I would, but you can give that person some time and establish that rapport and interest. You want to teach about anxiety, autism, or whatever it is you're kind of working on. So there's a book here on the right. Some of you might be familiar with who Temple Grandin is, but this is the girl who thought in pictures, and it's a story written by Temple Grandin about her autism. So it's really important that you're naming it, that you're talking about it. If you're talking about ADHD, if you have a way that you usually do psychoed where you're talking to kids, if you show a video, if you do the flip your lid hand model, whatever you're doing, you want to try to maybe even have a couple of those different strategies in your back pocket. So you can think about like, if this is not working, it's not like conveying that information, trash it and go to like what the next thing is on your list. So it is a little bit of a lesson plan in trying to have all of these things. But you want to make sure that you plan for extra time to teach about understanding emotions. A lot of individuals in the mental health world have a lot of different like games and charades and ways, you might need to try a couple of those different things, dry erase marker on a mirror, a lot of different ways that you want to try to understand and work on some emotional vocabulary. And when verbal expression is hard, colored pencils and paper, I feel like are a great thing just to have on hand. So some modifications that can be made during the practice phase. I'm sticking with my cat theme here, and you can see that on this emotional thermometer that I've created with somebody. Again, they really like cats. So if they liked something else, I would make sure that I use whatever their interest was to show like that relaxed to scared. You want to show that anxiety from low to high. You could make the thermometer as big or as like what's appropriate for the person that you're working with. You want to make sure that you have lots of them. Give them to the person who's supporting their homework, give them to them, have a couple in your office or on Zoom to be able to share them. But you really want to use that prop to illustrate how high their anxiety is around a specific situation. And that personalization is really, I find to be quite key, and also like making it feel like you're really understanding that person. So whenever you're practicing exposures, use interactive multimodal teaching. So I'm a big proponent of use, visit, go to the thing, meet wherever it is that might be whatever it is that you're working on as you're going through. It's a little bit abstract to talk about an elevator, if like let's say what you're working on. Or like if someone's really will not walk in any sort of wooded area on the idea that a snake could pop out. Go for a walk. If you work in teletherapy, fix your schedule, meet somebody there. Like you want to make sure that you're trying to be like with the thing. Using reinforcers are really important. Talking to the parents or individuals who are involved with this person that you're working with to see what's like reinforcing what has worked. You want to be creative and flexible for what motivates them. If it's not working, it's not reinforcing. And so you kind of have to do a little bit of a back step to figure out where things are breaking down. Use praise that's appropriate to the youth affect. So like having like really big labeled praises and seeming like you're like super happy might be really overwhelming to somebody who like that's not where they are. So you want to kind of make sure that you're appropriate with their affect. Social skills and coaching can be helpful for social phobia. So if you're working on social phobia where someone's like really anxious about being around other people, you want to make sure that they have like the social, you're supporting their social skills to be in that social situation. So you just want to back that up a little bit and think about those as well. Including caregivers, so super important. Sometimes you can even have them on Zoom with you if you work in an office where there's a one-way mirror, if they can observe the session, if it's somebody who's under the age of 18 or somebody who agrees, really great for them just to sort of see the work that you're doing. And exposures are difficult, so expect resistance, expect to go back and work on kind of really building that confidence and trying to move forward and being reinforcing and keeping that thermometer handy and, allowing extra time. This might not go as quickly as it might if you were working with somebody non-autistic. So I'm going to switch gears really quickly here, and I'm talking a little fast because I want to make sure that we have time to hear Jessica's story. But in working with May is Trauma Awareness Month, we want to think about trauma and autism. And so individuals with autism may be at an increased risk of traumatic exposures and are more prone to certain stressors. So social confusion, peer rejection, bullying, sensory kind of negotiating the environment, and then they're typically developing peers. So autistic people can be at increased risk of experiencing victimization or significant stressors and may have limited coping skills to respond to these experiences. Research to date suggests that individuals with autism may be at increased risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder following exposure to traumatic life events. PTSD by definition includes symptoms that are specifically related to the trauma event or reminders of the event. So we know that children with autism may have a higher rates of co-occurring internalizing disorders such as anxiety and depression than the general population, and often struggle with emotional regulation skills that would kind of help facilitate that stress. So therefore, it's common for autistic people to present with symptoms of general stress, difficulty with adaptive coping, anxiety or worries, anxiety or mood symptoms that can be related to autism, such as significant stress or anxiety, social rigidity, mental inflexibility. So, if a traumatic stressful event has occurred, it's really important to make sure that you're screening, thinking about acute stress disorder, PTSD, big little T trauma, any kind of like post-stress kind of a reaction that you might see just in anyone else. And just as in CBT, there are autistic sensitive applications of trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or TFCBT. And that is really probably the most supported treatment for the impact of trauma in children. So TFCBT can be really effective treatment for individuals with autism who experience trauma and have clinically significant trauma kind of impact. So on this slide here, you can see that there are some good modifications for TFCBT. I'm not going to go through all of them today. I don't know if we added it to the Padlet, and if we didn't, I will after this today. But there is a good PDF that some brilliant person has created that, just like I went through the modifications for CBT, there's good modifications for TFCBT. And it probably talks a lot about the same things, about slowing things down, about using visuals, about being concrete. But it's really my kind of take home, and what I want you guys to think about is that if you're practicing TFCBT, you can certainly use that with someone with autism. On the next slide, you'll see that there is also a resource guide that we've developed in collaboration with Trauma Matters Delaware last year, the end of last year, somewhere around there. That's also on your Padlet, and you can also snag that off of our resource guide page online. Again, those can be ordered. You can get it as a PDF right from the web page, but there's a lot of good resources on there. Actually, the TFCBT modifications is on this resource guide, the PDF that I like and that I professionally recommend and reference myself. So all of my fast talking has led us to Jessica's story. So this is Jessica. She's a 27-year-old autistic woman. She was diagnosed with autism her senior year in high school. And in her interview, she talks a lot about dealing with anxiety, depression, therapy, and she was diagnosed with what was Asperger's. So Asperger's has since been more or less condensed into the autism spectrum disorders. So Asperger's used to be thought of as like a milder form of autism, or like someone who might have been having like a lot of social communications and had difficulties and was having, showing a lot of like maybe expertise in an area. Sometimes people call it like little professors, but this is a really great story. I hope you guys enjoy this. There's nothing to watch. Nicole's just going to press play on this and we're just going to be listening to her story.
My name's Jessica. I'm 27. I had to actually think about that. And I'm from here. I'm from Annandale, Virginia. I've lived here my whole life. I'm autistic. It didn't get diagnosed until pretty late, actually. Roughly like my senior year in high school. There wasn't much like awareness for autism at that time, especially not in girls. It was pretty widely assumed that, only boys are autistic, or it's almost always boys, because they hadn't quite made the connection that boys and girls present differently. Girls are more conditioned or socialized to, behave and fit in. So you start watching other people without realizing any of this, obviously, but you start watching other people and just kind of mimicking what they do. Just, these are the normal people, so if I do the normal things like the normal people, then I am also a normal people. I have had anxiety probably my entire life. Was it recognized as anxiety? No. But it's one of those things where you look back on it and it's like, wow, I was a ball of anxiety as a kid. I'm still a ball of anxiety. That hasn't changed. I didn't realize it myself until I was reading about a Tumblr post about people who worked with anxious kids and stuff, and they started listing off these symptoms of anxiety in children. And one of them was being like the really quiet child, just the one who's always hanging back and looking for approval from adults and stuff. And it's like, wow, that's me. And it makes sense, because with the anxiety, you don't go out and do things because the anxiety tells you not to. And also, you can't screw something up if you don't do it, which is a very bad way of thinking. I have very deep-seated issues with failure. Sort of the terrible mental connection is, if it's something I did not do perfectly on the first try ever, it's a failure. Is that valid? No. Does my brain think it is? Yes. I was diagnosed with depression in my sophomore year of high school, and that was like probably the most classic stereotypical anything I've ever experienced, because I went from, doing okay in school to literally sleeping through every class and just not caring about anything at all. Not eating, not caring about eating, not caring about school, wasn't playing video games, which is my lifeline. And I started seeing a therapist, started working with her in sophomore year of high school, and she helped me with that and got me on medication. And that made a pretty drastic improvement, actually. I went from my grades in that year, like the first 2 quarters, I was getting like, B's and C's, average. The third quarter, I got like straight F's, because I was asleep for everything. And then in the fourth quarter, which is when I started on treatment and getting better, I got like straight A's and a D, because you can only recover so much when you sleep through a whole semester or a whole quarter of a foreign language. But it was pretty interesting, because one of my teachers actually, and I didn't know this until later, but one of my teachers actually commented to my parents that they really didn't think there was anything wrong and I just needed to apply myself more. And they were forced to retract that statement when they saw the drastic improvement in both my mental health and my grades just over the course of 1 quarter. And they're like, never mind, there was a problem here. Because I know with a lot of teenagers, depression and anxiety and stuff, that get brushed off as, it's just, you're just a moody teenager. You'll grow out of it. It's fine. And is it fine? Maybe. But do you really want to take that chance? I wouldn't. The autism diagnosis was weird, actually. I underwent testing in like 3rd grade for what I assume now are developmental disabilities. And they came back with, it's probably ADHD, maybe get retested in a few years for Asperger's. And I got retested a few years later. I want to say 8th grade. And I have absolutely no idea what happened with that testing, because I think everyone involved dropped the ball completely, because I finally got a chance to read the report from that testing when I was 24, and it says in plain as day, autism, here are all these things that you can do to help, here are things that need to be done. Never got mentioned to my parents, never got mentioned to my parents. Don't remember ever hearing about it. I really don't think it's willful ignorance on their part. I really think that it just woof right over everyone's heads. So the paperwork says I was diagnosed in 8th grade, but we didn't know it until my senior year in high school, which was actually a funny story. I basically diagnosed myself. I do that a lot. I spent most of the time in my senior year, I spent most of the lunch hour in the library because I liked reading, and also it was quiet in there, and the lunchroom was noisy and smelled bad and was annoying. Which, surprise, that's autism, that's sensory processing. But, so, and looking back on it now, obviously one of my special interests is medicine, medical stuff, so I would just park myself in the medical section and just grab any book that looked interesting and just start reading it. And I was working my way through a little section of books on, childhood, disorders, stuff like Down syndrome and, Down syndrome and other, congenital thingers, and I picked one down that said Asperger's, and I'm reading it, and I'm like, wait. This book is about me. Why is this book about me? I'm checking it out. I'm bringing this to my therapist. So I did, and I brought it to my therapist, and she's like, wow, this book is you. And then I took it to my neurologist at the time, and he's like, oops. I got it confirmed and everything, but it was very interesting reading a book and just every single one of these is me. Just, dislikes change, likes routine, doesn't make eye contact with talking, special interests that are bordering on an obsession, just difficulty with recognizing names and faces, sensory processing issues, sensitivity to sound, light, smell, whatever. And I'm like, check. Okay, this is interesting. Because, for the whole time I've been in, I'm just the weird kid. I'm the weird kid that gets picked on because I'm the weird kid. And it's nice to know, okay, so that's why I'm the weird kid. Probably, I think it would have been nice to know that just, hey, I'm not just weird, I'm not just doing these things, whatever these things are, I'm not just doing it because I feel like I feel like causing problems on purpose. That's not how my brain was working, but just a lot of people seem to run on the assumption that I basically woke up one day and just, I think I will cause trouble today because I can. I think that happened a lot with my parents. Still kind of does a little, but not as much now that they're getting more informed on this. I've been in there. I have been seeing the same therapist since that sophomore year. She's just drastically been changing what she works with me on, because it was primarily the anxiety, or no, it was primarily the depression, and then it's just been moving to working with both the autism and the anxiety, and various other just things that crop up that I need help with. We had several sessions around my 26th birthday when it came to getting booted off my parents' health insurance, and oh God, now I have to find all these doctors, and oh God, what is the marketplace? Oh God, what is health insurance? I don't know how normal people do it. I didn't handle it well. It worked out in the end, but we had several sessions on working our way through that. I do like that she listens to me about working through the things that are like really bothering me, but she also is kind of a you might need to edit this one out. She's kind of a take no shit person. So if I'm in one of my anxiety spirals about how I'm worthless and I can't do this or whatever, she will just be like, no, you are not. We've been over this more than once. And, help kind of pull through it. Just like, I know you can do this because you've done it before. Like, when I first started seeing her, like, there was no way in hell I would actually be even thinking about driving a car ever. Ever. Like, I think I had a full breakdown the first time she had me just sit behind the wheel of a parked car. And now I've got my license, and I drive, and I don't like it, but I'll do it. She worked with me on that for quite some time. I didn't get my license until I was like 21. I probably would have benefited from much earlier anxiety intervention, but, I can't dunk on my parents for this. It's not their fault. They didn't, it's not like they knew and were like, I'm not going to get her help because she's fine. No, they didn't know. Just have a more wider acceptance and education of both developmental disabilities and mental health issues, and also both of them together. Because there's a lot of one, there's a lot of the other, and there's probably a substantial overlap of both. I'm a both.
Okay. Let's see. I don't know. No. There I am. Okay. So I've heard Jessica's story like so many times. I just love listening to that so much. I feel like she does like such a good job of talking about her story and sharing kind of like she's saying that intersection of autism and mental health, and she's female, and she doesn't use the word masking, but in the beginning you heard her talk about how she just like pretends and she just like makes herself fit in, and that's masking, and about her diagnosis. You heard her talking about her interest in medical. And so she was reading a medical book, like as she was kind of clipping through the library bookshelf, and discovered autism and thought, hey, that sounds a lot like me. You heard her talking about why she was in the library, because the cafeteria just had way too many sensory experiences for her to be able to feel like she could eat lunch in there. Speeding along to when she's in her therapy sessions with her therapist, and like when she describes her anxiety, and you like thinking about her like sitting behind the wheel of the car and like feeling like anxious about that. I'm sure that was part of like her exposure therapy. So we just love using Jessica's story because we think it's like such a nice way to kind of take what we talked about in this very quick hour and 45 minutes and have that autistic voice to kind of pull all those intersections together and present some information that really would make hopefully some people think that they might be seeing someone with autism and you're not treating their autism. We're not doing that. We're really thinking about other things just like everybody else that might have challenging situations, but how autism increases one's susceptibility to have those experiences. So we're going to, I hope I'm going to see Erin Mitchell is able to pop on here for a minute. She's the executive director of Trauma Matters Delaware, and she would like to say a few words about TMD. She's having some internet connections where she is, so we'll see if that's something that she can come on and talk to us about. Okay, possibly not. I'm not sure. Maybe she's not. But we're really excited to be doing our work with her. And we have just a few resource slides that we're going to go over. And then I think we might actually have a little bit of time at the end for questions. We'll see. But I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole, who's going to go over the resources specific to Delaware.
Okay, so we want to just share some additional resources that may be helpful to you. As we mentioned, Autism Delaware is our network partner. Many of you may be familiar with them, but they provide family navigation, training, information dissemination, and much more. They have a variety of events and support groups for families. They have a number of support services. So I really encourage you to check out Autism Delaware, go to their website, see all that they offer and access all that they offer. Swank Autism Center is another familiar institution in Delaware. They provide diagnostic evaluations and a full array of psychological and behavioral and mental health programs. So they serve as a really great resource for our state. Some additional resources that we wanted to share with you. We have PIC, which is Parent Information Center. They provide information, trainings, technical assistance, and support for parents of children with disabilities from birth to age 26. Family Shade and Delaware Family Voices are both now part of PIC. Specifically, Family Shade connects families and children with healthcare needs and providers to information, resources, services. They also serve as advocates and help to recognize gaps in services and advocate for supports to fill those gaps. Delaware Family Voices, more specifically, is led by parents of children and young adults with physical, developmental, and mental health challenges. And they can also provide support to families in navigating healthcare systems, accessing a variety of supports and services. Some additional resources, and before I talk about these, I just want to note these are all linked in the PDF of the slide deck. The PDF of the slide deck is in your Padlet that we've provided the link for today, and I have a QR code for that Padlet in a moment. But a few additional resources. DNEA is part of the University of Delaware Center for Disability Studies, and the CDS really works to enhance lives of individuals with disabilities and their families through education, advocacy, service, and research. There's one particular resource available through CDS that I want to point you in the direction of. It's linked on the page, and it's what you see pictured on your page. It's a roadmap to services. So this roadmap is designed for families to be interactive and user-friendly to help them navigate different organizations, supports, and resources that are available to them in the state of Delaware. Some additional learning resources we just wanted to note here are listed. Those are the 3 online learning links, and they just provide an opportunity to dig deeper into different content and evidence-based practices. As I mentioned, we wanted to share, because of what we were talking about today, the crisis resources in Delaware for youth. So you have this for your future reference. I don't know if Erin is back on, but just wanted to note that they actually have a lunch and learn tomorrow. Oh, there's Erin. Erin, did you want to quickly say hi?
Absolutely. And it goes without, saying that during the whole pandemic, I probably had 0 disconnect issues, and they all waited till today to happen over the 3-year period. So I do apologize, but quickly, thank you so much, DNEA, to Alicia Fletcher, to Nicole Garrity. I'm so excited to have this partnership. And as you heard today, this type of partnership has really broadened and strengthened my organization's scope, the understanding, the reach, and just the inclusivity of all of our stakeholders. So, the expertise that TMD has been able to garner from the DNEA has been invaluable. And Alicia and Nicole, you both are experts and have made this partnership an effortless collaboration. So again, just thank you. And as they have up on the screen, tomorrow we have a lunch and learn on how to be an ally to LGBTQ plus people. So you can scan that QR code, or I can drop a link to the Eventbrite in the chat.
Thank you, Erin. We also have the flyer for the TMD event tomorrow in the Padlet. The QR code that you see on your screen, if you have a QR reader on your phone, you're welcome to use that. Use it to scan, and that will give you access to the Padlet. I'll also put right now a link to the Padlet into the chat. And as we've mentioned, the DNEA, some of the things that we talked about today related to visual supports and other practices related to modifications to CBT. We have a plethora of live trainings, video recordings, and resource guides that talk about reinforcement, that talk about visual supports, that talk about a wide range of other evidence-based practices. So we really encourage you to use the Padlet as a springboard to check out our DNEA training calendar, to look at the resource guides and the other supports and technical assistance that we provide at the DNEA. In addition, we also really value your feedback. I'm going to drop into the chat a link to an anonymous feedback survey, and we do review this information and use it to inform our trainings. You're also welcome to scan the QR code that you see on your screen. You can also access the survey via the Padlet. So you'll see both of those links into your screen. And again, we really appreciate your input into the training today. Lastly, just want to point you in the direction of some of the references that we use to develop this training. Again, the training slide deck and PowerPoint is within the Padlet. At this time, again, thank you to Trauma Matters Delaware for your partnership, for your collaboration, and thank you to you all for spending the past almost 2 hours with us, and for all the work that you do to really build capacity for serving autistic individuals and their families in our state.